And with that, we are going to be live here with Jeff Clark, U.S. Air Force veteran and author with his first book. You'll want to pay attention, come in, and learn the ultimate guide to leadership in Hear These Truths. It is a great book, and you'll want to pay attention. He's also got a podcast. So I've got the book highlighted in the carousel. I have got his podcast there, and I'm just going to highlight for a moment because I have just launched a new solo podcast myself. It is also in the carousel, and it is for those of you who would like to also become a published author here on Amazon, and it walks you through that. So the podcast is Publish Your Book, and it is a companion to my book also on Amazon here, which is Influence, Creation of Credibility, How to Publish a Book, Online Course and Webinar in 12 Weeks or Less. I am, of course, using my the equipment that I've got. I love the Shure microphone, so that is in the carousel with the Cloud Lifter and the Focusrite Solo. The microphone that I'm not using today, which I should be using because we're coming up to the 4th of July holiday, is the Patriot Edition of the MXL 990 microphone. That is a great sounding microphone, but that's enough about my stuff. What we really want to do is bring Jeff in because he has got the brand new book out, and it is the one that is highlighted in the carousel. And Jeff, so I mentioned a little bit of introduction. You are retired from the Air Force. Thank you for your service. We definitely sleep better at night because you and other citizens that have chosen to do that sacrifice. Thank you so much to you and your family. But let's go ahead and have you give an introduction to yourself, where you at, and then we'll get into the book.
Yes, sir. Well, first, congrats on launching the new solo podcast. That's awesome. Congratulations for that. And I love that microphone. So I have to get with you offline and find out how you got that. I need one of those for sure.
It's a great sounding microphone. It looks great, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a Patriot Edition.
Best looking microphone I've ever seen. So, yeah. As you said, Jeff Clark, 12-year Air Force veteran. I was medically retired about 5 years ago. And I really kind of took out on this journey to find myself after the military, find out what I was going to do. Kind of led me down the road to a lot of civilian positions within the government where I was leading a lot of operations. And I just got really inspired and said, it's time to write a book. It's time to kind of spread the word on some of these things. And then I happened to win a really big award that really kind of told me, okay, I got to do this. I have to do the book. I have to do a little bit more because I think I have a lot to provide to people, and I could really help out a lot of folks. So here we are 5 years later. I'm just turning and burning.
That's great. That's great. Well, again, thank you for that. Now, when you were in the Air Force, and we talked a little bit about this because I was able to be a guest on your podcast.
Yes, sir.
And in fact, that episode just released. So I encourage people. Course of Action is Jeff's podcast. It's in the carousel. You can click. You can listen to it right here on Amazon Music. You can also find it where all fine podcasts are listed. But let's talk a little bit about your Air Force journey. What led you to join the service and specifically the Air Force?
Well, I was working at Sears at the time, and for those listening, you might be or might not be familiar with what Sears is. It's a used to be a big retail store. It was one of the biggest in the world,
Hmm.
um, and I was working there after high school. I was attending some college classes. I just kind of wasn't college just wasn't for me at the time. I tried it, and it wasn't working. And my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, said, "Hey, if we want to take this any seriously, we probably need to do something along the lines of getting serious, and that means real income. Selling TVs and Allen wrenches and treadmills
Hmm.
at Sears just probably wasn't going to pay the bills long term. So." Um, she said, we had some serious talks, and she said, have you ever thought about joining the military? Since college isn't working right now, join the military. They'll still pay for college when you're ready. Gives us a great career, stability,
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. I said, I don't know. And my brother-in-law was in the Air Force at the time, and he said, hey, let me tell you all the good, and I'll tell you all the bad.
Hmm.
And I said, you know what? I'll go talk to some recruiters. So we went and talked to the Air Force. We went and talked to the Navy, and that's as far as I got. Um, so I didn't go talk to the Army, and I knew I wasn't a Marine. So I didn't give them the time or the opportunity, but I didn't follow back up with the Navy recruiter. I liked what the Air Force recruiter said in response to the questions that I wrote down and asked.
Hmm.
Because I sat on it for about a week and just kind of thought, if I do this, this is my future. This is a career. At
Hmm.
21 years old, that's a big decision. So
Yeah.
but I knew what was coming with it. I knew it was a, engagement, a marriage, a
Hmm.
career. I mean, a lot was going to change in like a year's time. So I joined the Air Force because my brother-in-law was in it. He told me good things. The recruiter answered the questions correctly, whether they were true or not. He answered them correctly.
Yeah.
So I signed on a dotted line and said, let's do this.
Hmm. And when you signed, when you say, as you say, when you signed on the dotted line, did you have a guaranteed job? Did you know what you were going to be doing before you shipped out to basic training?
I did. That was one piece of advice that somebody told me was if you can get a guaranteed job, get it. And I went down to MEPS like everybody does, military entrance and processing station. And, I went through the list of jobs, and my brother-in-law told me ahead of time, like, hey, there's some jobs. Don't go do those. Make sure you're paying attention to the list and what they're offering you,
Hmm.
and kind of stand firm. And I did. And I picked a medical job because I thought medical's always going to be around. Logistics and supply chain sounded like a good business trade to have,
Hmm.
that it'd go well on the outside. And at the time, I was thinking, well, I'm just going to do like my 4 or 5 years, get my education, and I'm going to get out. Grass is going to be
Sure.
greener, right? And I didn't know what the future was going to hold, but that was my thought at the time. So I picked a job with the intention of leaving, having something that would transfer well. So
Hmm.
I did medical logistics, and I got it written in my contract, and I sat around for, I think it was pretty close to 8 months
Hmm.
in delayed entry. And I got engaged, I got married, I got my affairs in order, and I left in April of 2005 for basic training.
Okay. Yeah. And so you're shipped down to Texas, and you grew up in Ohio. Is that correct?
Oklahoma.
Excuse me, Oklahoma. Yeah, you grew up in Oklahoma, so not a big difference moving to Texas for a short time.
It was hotter. It was hotter.
Well, I was in San Antonio in February, and it's cold. So
I went to basic training in April through June.
okay.
So it
Hmm.
was an absolute inferno. I mean, it
Yeah.
was 100, 105. I mean, just it was hot.
Well, that's yeah. Basic training is always going to be what it is wherever it is, and so you go in with medical and logistics and into the service, and of course, they're known for command and control when it comes to leadership. And so you spend time in 12 years, and then you obviously at that time had planned to stay in for a full 20, 30 at that point, but got the medical discharge, and then but you had a lot of training and a lot of experience, probably with good and bad leaders.
Yes.
What did you find?
Well, I found that I found a lot of things. I think I found the biggest thing was that leadership is one of the hardest, easy things to do. And I say that because um, it sounds easy.
Hmm.
It can look easy. Um, it can even appear easy. It could feel easy to you, and you'll be surprised at how much you can do wrong with very, very little. You can say one word and really throw things off. And I just realized how dynamic a thing leadership really was, and I kind of just started to study it, and I really looked up to, my commanders and senior enlisted and people that were above me, and I just kind of looked and observed, and I said, who's doing this right, who's doing this wrong, who's being honest.
Hmm.
um, and I think the biggest thing that I really, really learned was the truth. It was being truthful, not just to other
Hmm.
people but to yourself,
Right.
because ownership, and a lot of other military members have talked about ownership, and that's a huge deal. It says a lot when you stand into a room with a couple hundred people and say, hey, I was wrong on this, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
taking ownership for it. And you gain, as odd as it sounds, you can gain a lot of credibility and a lot of respect for saying I screwed up.
Sure.
And
Hmm.
that's the thing I really kind of observed between good and bad leaders, was the ones who would deflect and say, it's not really my problem. This is on you guys. You could should have messed it up, and now you got to fix it. As opposed to leaders who said, okay, we have to own this. We is
Hmm.
a real word. It's not hollow. Um, and they owned it, and they owned the process, and they empowered people
Yeah.
to fix it. And it wasn't some explosive thing. It was like, okay, well, let's call it like it is. This is broken, and
Yeah.
we have to fix it, and let's go forward together.
I've back in my days of working in a bank, I definitely saw some good and bad leaders, and one of the worst was when decisions were made and handed into the branch level, and branch managers were asking for help in implementation, and the response, literally word for word, was, "You just have to manage through it."
Yeah, suck it up. I mean, in the military, we have some of that. We have,
Hmm.
kind of that suck it up and embrace this situation type of thing. And it's applicable. It really is, because there's situations you go to in the military that you get put in that you have to just embrace the horribleness about it. But that's why we have the military, to go do some of those things and to do the things that ordinary people cannot. But it's not a valid explanation, you
Hmm.
know. Yeah, sitting in a foxhole in the middle of Iraq because you have to is a different level of,
Yeah.
suck. You kind of have to at the time. You can't drive to a Motel 6. There's no Marriott down the street. But to tell people, hey, you're gonna have to manage through this. This is horrible. We'll deal with it.
Hmm.
Is just, that's not owning it. That's deflecting it and saying it sucks for you. It's not for me, and
Yeah.
that's a poor choice of words for anybody to stand in front of
Hmm.
people and say, because it just sounds like the rules are for thee, not for me,
Right.
and I don't
Yeah.
care.
Yeah. Yeah. It's now a lot of leadership that we've had over the years was basically, well, in the early days, I'll say early days, 50s up through the 70s and into the 80s, was a lot of World War II veterans.
Hmm.
And they learned their leadership through the military, which again is command and control. And it's basically, you do what I tell you. And if you're one of the followers, then you do what you're told. And if you don't, then you lose your job. And but I think David Marquet, and I should have put his book in here as well. He wrote "Turn That Ship Around," which was his experience leading as a skipper of a submarine, and where he was able to really change that command and control type of leadership. And it really did start with him. And this is what you talk about in your book, is you're talking about these truths, and there's you've got kind of an outline around the power of purpose, process, and progress. So maybe we can kind of talk about that a little bit.
So yeah, when I wrote the book initially, it was like 55,000 words of just my thoughts on leadership and some of my stories from the military. And after I read through kind of that first draft, I kind of said, you know what, I'm not that special. Nobody's just going to pick this up and be like, oh wow, well, hey, look at this, and I'm just read it and soak it up. So I said, I really need to give somebody value. If they pick this
Mhm.
book up and they read it through, what is like one thing that they could remember that would encompass the whole book and they'd be able to move on. And at the time, I was building my website and I had talked to a guy on LinkedIn and he was like, hey, there's three things, that people need to know when they look at your website, and he rattled off these three things. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but those three things kind of stuck with me for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, if I can remember those three things, I got to give people three things that they can remember. And I started doing a little research on computers. I was like, why did he say those things? It was just like they need to know who you are, what you do, and where they can buy from you if that's the first thing they see.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, okay. And the more I dug into that, the more I realized, same thing. So I said, I needed three things. I need a little algorithm, a little something people can take away. And that's when I came up with, effort plus process equals progress.
Mm-hmm.
And I define in the book, those three sections and things about leadership and management and some of my personal stories that kind of fall into that. And I just said, if anybody reads the book and they take those three things away, that's all they remember. Well,
Mm-hmm.
they can remember that there's effort into everything. There's always
Mm-hmm.
processes you have to deal with for those efforts. And then there's always progress that comes out on the other end. And the
Mm-hmm.
unique thing about progress is sometimes it's not always good. Well, what do you do if it's bad progress? You still have to do something with it. It's a whole nother subject. So I really stuck to that. I really said I need those three things that people close the book, last chapter, effort, process, and progress.
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful. And you also talk about this really being truthful with yourself first. And I know in the mastermind group that I'm a part of, every time when we meet face to face, we do what's called a duct tape session. We do this twice a year, and the duct tape session means that I would not literally but figuratively put a piece of duct tape over my mouth. I'm not allowed to respond, but those in the mastermind would point out my superpowers, my weaknesses, and my blind spots.
Hmm.
And as you're talking about, one of the things you say is, what are you good at? What are you bad at? And what do you want to improve? But you say, really, this is something that you should, I mean, you can look internally, but you really need to turn to your advisors, your mentors, uh,
Yeah.
those people who are putting into your life.
Yeah, I think it's really important that when you're trying to grow and mold yourself and become a little bit more of a leader, or even just grow yourself, if you're not necessarily an extroverted leader or anything like that, but you have to be honest with yourself. But I think the way you do that is by taking things from the people around you, and the people who care about you and what you need to say to yourself.
Mm.
And it's really, really important that you listen to your mentors, the leaders around you, people you look up to, people that you work with, and listen to what they're saying, because inside those words is where the truth lies. The real understanding of how they feel about you and what they think about, you as a person. So that was kind of the turning point for me in my career when I realized that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to look in the mirror and say, am I really leading people because I'm trying to lead them, or am I leading them to keep myself clean and out of trouble?
Right.
How am I doing it?
Yeah.
For what intent? And that was when, that truthful conversation that you have with yourself really occurred, and it was a game
Mm.
changer.
Yeah. And I want to put this up here again on the screen. I just want to highlight that we are talking with Jeff Clark. Hear These Truths, the ultimate guide to building your leadership algorithm. And a 12-year veteran of the U.S. Air Force. And this is your first book. And you've got also a podcast. Both of these are in the carousel. So for anyone watching, either live or in the replay, click on the book and take a look. This is Jeff. This is your first book, and I imagine that there might be some more coming because,
Yes.
as you said, there was a lot of your thoughts that went into it, and then you put in this great effort and process and progress, and kind of give people some structure around that. Being truthful with yourself, and then people can click if they click on the book, they can do a little preview, take a look in there, and there's one of the stories that you tell right off the bat about your chief in the Air Force being honest with you.
Yeah. So my very first chief in the Air Force really, really kind of struck me one day. He pulled me into his office, kind of told me a story, and just asked me some questions. And I basically answered all of them wrong. um, I missed it, like struck out big time. Should have seen it coming, and he did it for a reason. He did it really to wake me up so I could see what I wasn't seeing and to understand what I wasn't trying to understand, because I was young and immature, and I really needed that wake up call. And he saw that in me, and that story stuck with me and kind of helped me in multiple different ways. It opened up my eyes, one, and two, it made me realize leaders do unselfish things for unselfish reasons. And he by no means had to pull me into his office and take the time and do that. But he saw something in me that needed to occur, and he knew it was his obligation, his responsibility as a leader, knowing that 6 months down the road when he retired, he was never going to see me again. But he had to leave the Air Force in certain hands. I could have been the future. I could have been a chief. I could have been leading people. Sure. So he took the time to do that and really changed my life. After that, I felt different about the Air Force. I felt different about myself. I did a lot of self-reflection, and I talk about that story first because it was a first that happened to me, and it was always stuck with me. And I just feel like it's really, really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, getting that outside perspective is so important.
Exactly.
And then taking it in the right vein.
You have to hear it. You have to kind of be willing to hear it. And I think he knew at the time that I was willing, but wasn't. And that private moment needed to happen, because I had been in for a while, maybe close to a year, I think, when that story happened. Maybe not quite a year. And, enough time for him to observe me and know what kind of individual I was. And when he did that, it was maybe it wasn't a wanted thing, but it was a necessary thing, and it needed to happen. And
right.
I fortunately listened, and I took it to heart, and I took something away from it.
Yeah. And what kind of relationship did the chief build with you and others that were in his charge prior to that encounter?
Well, I always had a good relationship with him. I knew him as a chief, as an E9, the top enlisted in that unit, and a lot of people did. But he was the type of leader that always walked around. You felt like his job was a people job. I've seen a lot of commanders and senior enlisted that once they get that corner office, they stay in it. Right. And he seemed to be uncomfortable being in that role of office guy, of meetings and talking policy and all that. He seemed uncomfortable with that. Where he seemed comfortable was with people. So he always walked around. I saw him 2-3 times a week easily. Every Tuesday morning at 8:00 before they had some big meeting, him and the commander walked around. He made the commander walk around, and it was just that influence, that impact that made me go, okay, this is what you do. Leaders don't sit behind a computer and manage and command from a desk. They manage, eye to eye with people. So more than just words are conveyed, and just his investing of that time and dedicating that time every single week, very consistently, made me know that when he spoke, and he spoke directly to me, it was for a reason. It was with passion and purpose, and it was just it was something that always kind of influenced me.
So that was important groundwork that was done before he made this difficult
Hmm.
decision to pull you in and give you this advice. And as again you said, this wasn't something that was necessarily going to benefit him directly,
No.
but it was his obligation, and so he took that to heart and looked to the long term benefit.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it was you know, I know it probably wasn't that tough of a decision for him to pull me in because he was a very open and vocal individual. You know,
Hmm.
you knew what he was thinking. He had no
As
problem
yeah,
voicing his opinion. He was professional about it, sometimes a little blunt, but uh, you knew when he spoke it meant something and that he
yeah.
was saying it because he wasn't going to mince words. He wasn't going to waste his time saying something or doing something that wasn't for a reason. So you knew when he said it, or he did it, that it was for a reason.
So, for those folks that are maybe unfamiliar with the military culture, we do have you have the officers that are commissioned, and those are the people that get saluted. They usually have bars on their shirt, whereas the enlisted folks, non-commissioned officers, have stripes on their shirt, on their sleeves. And the top end there is a chief master sergeant in the Air Force. E9, enlisted 9. So you start at the 01 and work your way on up to 9 after many, many years. And
Yes.
I'll just say that when you are a chief master sergeant in the Air Force, those officers have great respect for those folks. Even though they don't merit a salute, they definitely have great levels of respect.
Yeah, there's definitely that time where a chief and captain, major, lieutenant colonel area where they start to kind of become more peers than they
Hmm.
do officer and enlisted, and lieutenant colonel and chief. There's a level of experience and responsibility that I think starts to get, I don't want to
Hmm.
say equal, but in a manner of which you need me and I need you type of position. And there's a lot of respect that's shown that way. And most chiefs are 20-plus-year-old guys that have been around for a long time, have a lot of experience, and a lot of young officers and even experienced officers look up to them.
Hmm. Absolutely. We've got a comment from Freddie. It says, what I like about leadership is that it never runs out of style, never goes out of style.
I like that. That's a good
Yeah,
one.
that's really good. Yeah. And, people management is a very different skill set.
Yeah.
I think that it's one that you can't really read from a book. You do need to do some trial and error, but before you start doing the application, you do need some sort of a guidance, some sort of a guide. And that's what I really like about your book, Hear These Truths. So you're in the Air Force, you get a lot of good and bad leadership styles. We just had this great story with you and the chief. And then you end up in college studying computer science.
Yeah, I finally went back to school, started doing my bachelor's degree, computer science and operations management. I got a chance to do a dual bachelor, so that was pretty cool.
Hmm.
And I really just wanted to study business and operations and how things worked, because I felt like I started to kind of know people
Hmm.
and how to manage people. You don't ever know it all the way, but I started feeling like I was familiar enough with it that I wanted to expand on other aspects of leading people. So I wanted to be a computer engineer because I figured, man, the way technology is moving, that's the way to go.
Hmm.
I took my first Java programming class and I said, nope, never mind. Oh no, I was wrong.
Well, I stay away from the programming languages, as they say. I know enough. I know just enough computer language to get my face slapped.
Well, if I start talking computer language, somebody should slap me because I just no. I know how they work. I know how
Yeah.
a network works and all that. I
Hmm.
know the basics of it. I'm not a programmer, so I kind of shifted gears and still got a computer science degree, but it's a very basic computer science degree of just familiarization with networks and
Hmm.
computer systems and how they kind of work together, and that's the extent of it. But the
But
bigger
there's
one
something
was
you learned. There's something you learned in that process of computer science. The when we're talking about this, I mean, and it really is. It's in the title of your book.
Oh yeah, the algorithms.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I really kind of found out some terminology that I didn't know, and
Hmm.
more so than I wanted to, especially when I got into the programming class. Um, but the algorithm, what is an algorithm? And it's a computer term for those listening, and for those that are experts on computers and listening. And I'm getting ready to butcher this, so don't get mad at me in the comments. Um, but an algorithm is basically a process where there's an input put into a process and it gets an output. That's the whole purpose of it. It's not necessarily to do everything good or everything correct, but it's what happens in a computer system.
Hmm.
There's inputs into a process and then it puts out an output. And that's where the kind of the spark for the algorithm kind of came to me was, oh, well, there's a lot of things that you do as a leader. You put, effort into a process and then you get results, which is progress. And all of that could be good and bad, or sometimes it could be bad and have good results and vice versa.
Hmm.
And regardless of what all happens through that whole algorithm, you still have to deal with things. Like a lot of people think once you get a result, oh, it's bad, let's start over and try again. Or that's not necessarily how leadership works. Sometimes when you get a bad result, you have to address that bad result and things have to be fixed from there. You can't just hit the reset button and say, it
Hmm.
didn't happen. Let's try over, or let's start our computer, over. Let's do a hard boot. You can't do that in leadership. So
Hmm.
the algorithm is really, really important to me. Effort plus process equals progress, because I kind of just feel like that encompasses leadership.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as you say, that it's a system, the algorithm, right? And we learned this from Edwards Deming, who was a great consultant. I will say a process guru, who could be credited with the creation of the Toyota system. Let's leave that for another day. But one of the things that he said is that your system is producing exactly what it's designed to produce. And whether that is a quality product, quality output, whether it's a physical product or a service, whatever it is that you're putting out, it comes out of an algorithm, out of a process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's either going to be good or bad based on the system that you create. And that system includes those inputs, which are the physical items and the tools that are available, and the people that operate it. And that's really where you come in with hear these truths.
Yeah, I think managing people is a big process. People
Hmm.
can have all the tools and things they have in the world. You can give them everything they need to do a perfect job, but people have to be motivated. They have to be
Mm-hmm.
willing. You have to learn people, especially when you're a manager and you have 100 people that work for you. You have 100 personalities, 100 individuals. You know,
Right.
you're not going to manage all 100 of them the same way. You're going to
Hmm.
manage chunks of them the same way, and then some individuals certain ways and certain groups certain ways, because you're just not going to be able to do one policy that blankets for everyone. So you really got to learn people and learn that process, because that's such an integral part. Because again, you can have all the tools and physical things you need to do the job, but if you can't know people and manage people and understand them, that process is going to be broken from the get-go.
Hmm.
And you're not going to be able to, can't build a house without labor. Well, if
Right.
that labor doesn't know what they're doing with the tools or have the right tools or be motivated enough and skilled, you're not building that house.
Well, I think this is really appropriate for today's world. Of course, we have a lot of people that chose early retirement or to end their extended working into the retirement years through the pandemic, and so getting the right people into companies has been a real challenge. And a lot of it is people are able now to choose the company they want to work for, and they really choose the culture. And I know there's a part in your book too where you're talking about this strategy, because you can't understand how to manage 100 different people. You can't do it. You just can't do it. one-on-one. But if you have a strategy, right?
Yeah, you really got to be strategic in it. I think you have to. I talk about a specific strategy as like a new leader. Let's talk new leadership, basically.
Hmm.
I call it a 30, 60, 90-day process. And essentially, it's kind of a roadmap for the first 90 days of you coming into a new work center, a new environment. And the point of it is that when you come in guns blazing, you immediately strike blow up change. And you say, here I am. I'm different. This is new. And you get culture shock. And when you get culture shock, what do people tend to do? They tend to stiff arm it, give it the Heisman, and say, "Hold on, I don't like it." Even if they don't know if they like it, they do. It's different, and new, and it's in their face.
Yes.
That doesn't go well sometimes. Some people don't like that. Some people get excited by it because they don't know what's going on, but they just do. But I really witnessed this work 30, 60, 90 days. And basically, what you're doing for the first 30 days is you're in processing, you're getting your stuff together, decorating your office, getting to know names and faces.
Hmm.
No major policy changes, no major decisions unless you absolutely have to. And then in the next 30 days, leading up to 60, maybe you get a little bit more asking questions. Let me get to know you, Scott. Tell me what you do for his job. What's your purpose here in the company? Get to know people and processes. And then the next 30 days, you start weighing in on your opinion a little bit. Like, okay, what's broken? What needs work? What's our priorities? And you introduce yourself to the organization while you're listening and observing, and you're finding out what the organization is. Because a lot of people come in there and say, "Hey, I'm the boss. I'm the new guy. We're going to change X, Y, and Z and do all this."
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that a lot of times. They say, every time you get a new vice president, right, they've got to make changes in the organization. Otherwise, why did they get hired, right? It's very few vice presidents are going to come in and say, "Oh, yeah, my predecessor did a pretty good job and just stay the course." But listening, obviously, my title there, motivational listener. So I am a huge fan of listening. And in my experience, whenever you change jobs, you come into a new organization or change department, anytime you have a major change, my experience is that it takes 3 months before you kind of figure things out and get into some sort of a rhythm, which really follows this 90-day plan that you have. But I love the way that you've broken it out into these segments.
Yeah, and because I've seen a lot of people that came in the first 30 days and tried to do too much, and it really just inflicted chaos into an organization, and you just turn it on its head, and then they spent the next 6 months trying to unravel that.
Right.
And it's like, well, you just did that. That's your fault. You did that on your own. Nobody did that. Nobody ever walks into a new job and be like, "Hey, the last guy, he was spot on. That's why I'm here." I mean, nobody
Right.
says that,
Right.
The rare occasions, obviously, where people move on and a new guy comes in and it's different. But when you come in guns blazing, what are you doing? I mean, unless you're getting a promotion and you already know the organization and they already know you, you can't really do that because you're chaos and people don't like that necessarily. I mean, for example, look at the way when we get a new president, how does the first 6 months go? It's kind of chaotic, no matter what it is. It's just kind of chaotic, and leaders can't do that. They're making way too many tidal waves in a kiddie pool, and that's a dangerous thing.
Well, I just as we continue here, I just want to remind people we've got Jeff Clark. He is the author. This is first book of Hear These Truths: The Ultimate Guide to Building Your Leadership Algorithm. So we've kind of talked a little bit about what that algorithm was and kind of the structure to the book. And as we get a little bit deeper into this, one of the things you talked about early on too was this kind of as we paraphrase analysis paralysis, right? We start thinking of all the possible combinations, permutations and to try to be prepared for it. And obviously, the world is going to throw us unexpected curveballs, and all the planning and preparation could easily go out the window. But you do need to do some sort of what if type scenarios. And I think you've got a good kind of a plan with steps that go through and really help people understand how do you move past just planning and actually get into action.
Well, you can plan all day long. It doesn't really mean anything unless you back it up with actions, but your
Mm-hmm.
actions, you got to understand that your actions and your intentions are subject to change, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I planned my very first podcast that I ever did, I planned for it to go flawlessly. I was
Mm.
online an hour early, mic check, internet check, the whole 9 yards. Scott, you've done this long enough. But you know what I didn't plan for? I didn't plan for echo. And a week later I'm editing it and there's an echo
Mm.
because I didn't wear my headphones. So my microphone caught everything the screen was saying to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an echo. And I didn't have echo cancellation or the software that could fix it. So I had to call that person back and be like, hey, I need to reschedule because I absolutely screwed this up and I didn't even see it coming, So planning's great, but you need to expect the unexpected to happen. And I really think that planning is great. You should spend a good amount of time planning, but you need to understand that once you start putting plans into action, things can go off the rails. But you
Mm-hmm.
really got to take it a step further and say, I'm not just going to make a plan and then going to take action on it. And I'm then going to go look back and say, how did it go?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to do kind of what we called in the military, which was I'm slipping my mind now, basically a report afterwards. I can't think of the name.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to do a report afterwards. You're going to document
Yeah,
it.
you can call it post mortem or
I cannot think of that. It's
yeah.
slipping my mind. I've had a long day.
Yeah.
I took all my kids to dental appointments today, so
Gotcha.
I don't have hair to pull out, but I would have.
But you still got your beard, so we're happy.
Yeah. So yeah, afterwards you're going to document, but then
Mm-hmm.
what I saw in my experience as a civilian leader in the government was we did all that. We planned, we took action, and then we did, a post survey, a post documentation of it all.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we went to go do that thing again, we didn't go back and look at that report
Mm-hmm.
and say, how did it go?
Right.
We just forgot about that report. So it's kind of a 4-step process: planning, action, review, and then recovery, where you then go back and you rely on that information, or you make immediate changes to policy and processes and
Yeah.
the plans that you did. That way you're always moving forward.
Yeah. This is what's the interesting thing too, is you talk about the importance of communication, and but also that you have to make changes as a leader. And so if you communicate up front with the folks that you're working with, that we may make a decision and then change that decision later, and that it's not being wishy-washy. It's just that there's new information or new conditions, but if you communicate that ahead of time, then you're not seen as a indecisive leader, but you're seen as a responsive leader.
Well, and it takes a minute out of your day to send an email to the organization to explain, hey guys, policy change. Policy change is based on this. And I think the best decision going forward is to do X, Y, and Z as opposed to A, B, and C. And you're basically saying what you just said. New information has developed. I think this is the best decision going forward for the organization, for us. You can even caveat it with if there's a better idea, a better way, or anybody has any questions, you can come see me. I'm not a one-person decision-making machine, but there's sometimes where you have to make those decisions based on new information. You just have to. And it does look wishy-washy. It does look, and it can appear to be, well, you just said the other day, the policy was this, and now you're saying It's that, but it's something that people don't see coming. Like the other day, I saw somebody told me, a health professional told me that drinking warm water was better for you and would burn more fat than drinking cold water. And I said, who wants to drink warm water? I said, you're out of your mind. He said, I'm serious. Drink warm water, you'll lose more weight. I said, now I didn't think of it, but when I got home later, I was like, what study? Like what
Right.
expert told him this? But
Mm-hmm.
somewhere along the lines, new information came down
Sure.
that said it's probably better you drink warm water. I disagree.
Well,
It's not
as a
good.
as a coffee drinker, there
That's
are
what the
often
exception.
there's studies that come out all the time that say coffee is terrible for you,
Yep.
and coffee is great for you. Which are the ones that I read. So you'll always be able to find the information that supports your point. But I was just looking. Freddie made a comment here too about being excited for when he says can't wait for the first woman president, and so yeah, that's probably headed our way. I mean,
Yeah, I think as diverse as we're getting
yeah,
with new things, like an acceptance of new ideas. Yeah, I think it's a matter of time before we do have a woman
yeah,
president. I mean, we have a woman vice right now. It's only a matter of time before a woman takes the top office. And I think and I hope that when this happens, that our country is in a place where we can say the right thing, and that's say we're listening with open ears. We're not judging. We're not making fun, and we're giving someone the chance to do real change and be that person, because there are a lot of great female leaders out there.
absolutely. Yeah.
The Pentagon's made great strides with having female generals the last 6 or 7 years, and I think in no way, shape, or form does your sexual orientation necessarily dictate what kind of leader you're going to be of people, because I know that I've served under people who had different things going on in their life. They chose different kinds of life partners, and it made no matter at all. In fact,
right.
some of them I didn't even know,
Yeah.
had different lifestyles, and they were some of the most influential people on me. So I don't think that matters even a little bit. I think true leaders and good leaders do it for unselfish reasons.
As we start to wind down here, and as we're talking about it, you can be a good leader depending on it. It's not dependent on your background. It's not dependent on your education level. It's not dependent on whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. There's a lot of things that don't go into leadership. But let's talk about a few of those things that people that are existing leaders that want to figure out, how do I retain or attract talent in a very tight labor market? Or if you're a new leader, how do I get in and become that leader that you always wanted to work for? What are the main qualities?
Well, I think you got to be honest. You have to be honest and tell yourself that in this tight labor market where there's basically a war going on for talent. And a good acquaintance of mine, George Randall, wrote a book called The Talent War. It's exactly that. It talks about the war on talent and recruiting and human resources. And it's an excellent book. If you're one of those leaders, I suggest you go read it, because it makes a lot of sense. And you have to be honest with yourself as a leader and say, what we've been doing has worked. The rules of the game have changed. We're going to have to change and adjust with them. So we need to do our research. We need to learn, and we need to ask ourselves, what are we opposed to doing, or what are we willing to do? And you have to measure the risk. And I think you have to make decisions based upon that, because me, like even myself, my kids are 12 and 13 years old. They're doing different things than I am nowadays. They're all social media, all online on their phones. you know, you're recruiting a different type of individual than you were 10 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
or even 15 years ago, or even 5 years ago, with social media and all that changing. So leaders got to be able to be open and honest with themselves, evaluate processes, and not be necessarily stuck on or loyal to any certain thing. It's got to be able to be changeable and adaptable. You have to be adaptive. And
Mm-hmm.
the ones who don't do that are the ones who are going to be and find themselves in a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember many, many years ago, uh, fairly fresh out of college myself, in applying for a job, and we get to the point in the interview where this manager asked me that point, what questions do you have? And just as an interview tip for people, be prepared with some sort of a question
Absolutely.
to ask. Do your research. But the question that I asked was, what has changed recently within the organization? Because I thought that would give me some idea of kind of where they've been, where they're going, what the decision process was. To give me an insight in the organization. Now, it happened to be an accounting department. She literally leaned her elbows on the desk and looked at me and said, Scott, this is accounting. Nothing has ever changed. And I'm thinking, not an update on your software program.
Yeah.
You're still using goat skins, or do you punch it into clay tablets? I mean, where did you stop?
Nah, they're still doing it.
And I remember walking out of the interview thinking, why would I want to work for an organization that is stagnant?
And perfectly fine with it. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So I love this adaptability, because obviously the last 2.5 years have been a huge laboratory for adaptability. And we have seen organizations fail. We've seen organizations thrive in this. And it's those that were able to adapt.
Yeah. I mean, the pandemic really kind of kicked off a new era of job hiring and organizational leadership, because, not you were throwing the kitchen sink at things during the pandemic. Everybody from I think the best example I have is breweries. When I was in Colorado, I saw the breweries. Obviously a place where they sell beer, they rely on people coming in and sitting down, and nobody was doing that. So what did they do? The alcohol laws allowed them to can products and sell them to take home. And then they invited food trucks up there who needed to make a bit, living, selling their business. And then they sold food packages with the brewery, and you got to take home beer and some food packages, and you could come pick it up and do it. And then they were doing delivery service. So they adapted, and at the same time introduced a new process to their company that could sustain long term. So it was being adaptable and saying, what could we do, instead of just closing the doors. Some businesses just closed the doors and said, we'll try again if we come out of this, but we're not going to put the time in. Sure. Or we're not going to try. Or maybe they did try and it didn't work, but they were at least adaptable and tried to do something.
And I love that. What I've seen too is that businesses, we all had to endure the lockdown in the pandemic, and all of the things that went with that. But there are things that happen to businesses every day.
Yep.
It could be their landlord doesn't renew their lease, or something happens and the factory next door that supplied that restaurant or tavern is gone, shuts down. And so things happen all the time, and you do need to be prepared, and you do need to be able to make those changes. So let's just talk about, for the last few minutes here, how people can work with you. What's the best way for them? Obviously, first step, get your book, listen to the podcast.
Yes, do those two things. Yeah, you can go to jeffclarkofficial.com. And from there, you can see the podcast, you can see my blog, you can see my contact information. You can reach out on all the social medias, and of course, it points towards the podcast as well. The book's a great place to start, as you said. I got a lot of really good episodes on the podcast from different business leaders, different authors, people of different walks of life, and you can listen to a lot of that. You can get a really good idea of who I am. And then, of course, I coached somebody on some book publishing today, and I kind of pointed them your way. So hopefully they kind of follow up. So that worked perfectly. But yeah,
Excellent.
I do a little coaching on the side, a little consulting on the side. So, by all means,
Yeah.
JeffClarkOfficial.com. And then there's a tab to get in touch with me, and I'll be more than happy to have a conversation.
So would this be if someone was a brand new leader that might be or is thinking about leadership, that'd be a good person to reach out and talk to you about maybe hiring you to do some coaching.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And obviously we've talked about some of those things. What would that process look like for somebody? If someone is they're thinking, I want to take that next step. I want to get into leadership. What are some of the first things that you would do with that brand new leader?
Well, I'd kind of get to know them. What are you doing right now? Let's talk about right now. And so I can get a baseline of where you're at. And then tell me what you want to be doing. Where do you want to be? What are your aspirations? What are your thoughts on certain subjects? What do you think effort is? What do you think progress is? Ask some of those basic questions to kind of get an idea. And from there, once you have a further understanding, that's when I can really start to lead people in a direction. I don't want to say in the right direction, but in a direction. And then from there, we learn. We learn along the way. We adjust along the way. We're always open to new things and new ideas and making those adjustments. And we're being honest with ourselves along the way. And that's when the natural leadership of you comes out, and you start to learn and apply new things, and you just grow from there.
Nice. So we get this comment from Freddie here. He says one of his influencers is a leader, Abraham Lincoln. I can't disagree with that. In fact, I have a book, on in leadership in crisis, and talks about both Lincoln, two Roosevelts, and a Johnson as president, and leadership under crisis. So that's a good book. But I'll ask as we wind this down, Jeff, who are the influential leaders in your life? Living, dead, people that we know, famous, unfamous?
Oh, man. Great question. Wow. Really, I really get motivated by people who want to lead. Specific names. Simon Sinek, start with why. That was a big, impressive thing on me. Jocko Willink, a former Navy SEAL who wrote Extreme Ownership. George Randall, the author of The Talent War. Guys who are willing to go out there and say what needs to be said. Not because it's the politically correct thing. It's the truth. It's what people need to hear. I look up to people who are leaders who own the truth. Whether they own it for themselves or they own it because they tell it and then they apply it and they live it and embody it. So people that are honest are really, really big influencers to me. I look up to a lot of people, and fellow veterans out there. I really look up to a lot of them. And we have an obligation as veterans, I think, sometimes to share some of the things we've learned because we've done things that nobody else had.
Absolutely. And so those are great examples. And I'm going to put this back up again. Hear These Truths, the ultimate guide to building your leadership algorithm. Jeff, thanks for joining us here on Amazon Live today. And for those folks that were watching maybe on LinkedIn or YouTube, you can always come back and watch the replay here on Amazon. And the book is there in the carousel, as well as Jeff's podcast, Course of Action. Here's These Truths is his first book. Follow Jeff on his author page, because then when the next book comes out, you'll get notified.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Scott. I appreciate it.
With that, we're just going to sign this one out. So I'll send you out to the green room. Stand by there. All right. Thank you to everybody that commented. Freddie, I really appreciate your comments today. Thank you for joining us. And with that, we're just going to wind down this broadcast today. But check Jeff's book, Hear These Truths, The Ultimate Guide to Building Your Leadership Algorithm. Click on it there in the carousel. Take a look at the inside. And also, subscribe to the podcast, Course of Action with Jeff Clark. And with that, everybody, have a fabulous day. Cheers.